As a whole, people were looking for a good life, and I thought it was what a lot thought. It's in getting certain things, such as money, fame and other aspirations of the majority of human beings, I sought it, and I found myself young in a celebrity environment through radio and television. I started participating in children's programs, and our house in Rabat, Morocco, was very close to the radio and television building. I emerged in children's programs through my participation in charades and children's anthems, which were innocent and included judgment and preaching. That was at the beginning of the 1960s, and then I gradually started to move away from innocence. When we used young children to engage older adults in recording songs on radio, television and theaters. In terms of the impact of the environment, I began to care about this field in which I found myself, until I took part in a television competition for emerging voices, as they say. This was through a show broadcast live called Comus Luck. Then I had entries through other TV shows and I'm a student following my studies. Until I enrolled as a professional in Morocco's national band, I became a celebrated singer, such as Abdelwahab Dakali and Abdelhalim Hafez, who later became my biggest friend. At the same time, I was participating in the national radio cast until it emerged in the field of representation and I was playing major roles. Then I started preparing and presenting radio and television shows, which became one of the most popular and successful programs in the audience. In addition, I was providing radio and television newsletters with other activities in the field of media such as writing, salt, radio directing, etc. All this was in search of happiness that I did not find in that field full of worries, problems and hatred. Even though my relationships were good with everyone, I loved all my colleagues and loved me, except those who envied me for the success I had, in their eyes. In the society in which I lived, I was distinguished by the fact that I had strong friendships and relations with senior officials of the Moroccan government, where among my friends was the then Prime Minister of Morocco, Mufti Bouabid God's Mercy, who we used to exchange visits almost daily, and they called it in Morocco, First Minister, which made me become familiar with the lives of top officials and most famous artists, most of whom had been deprived of the happiness I was looking for, so I began to wonder, what was happiness? And who are happy? At a time when many people thought we lived happily envious, newspapers and magazines were writing about me. My activities are constantly being interviewed occasionally, until one day I was asked a question in an interview by a journalist who was following my news with great interest and his name. The question was, does the name match? That is, are you happy in your artistic and private life? My answer was, I'm SP, Quest, and I'm still missing D and I'm looking for him, and when I find him, I'll tell you. It was 1974. Since I did not find happiness in the field of art and media in which I lived, I said to myself, since the word happiness existed, it had to be felt, and I decided to take advantage of my radio programs that were successful, to search for lost happiness. In addition, I have included in the program the views of many audiences from different segments of society on this subject, and at the end of the program I have commented on these views. I asked for opinions on happiness, and they talked about everything but happiness. They told me about the sensations of man for a certain time and then it goes away, and the question remains, what is happiness? And where are they happy? After this, I said to myself, perhaps my choice was made only by the siblings who had seen their views and theories, so I decided to give way to all listeners on a live radio show, to express their views on happiness. Listening to the radio at that time was more than watching television, in addition to the fact that there were no satellite channels, and local stations were broadcasting their programs at certain hours. I received listeners' views on happiness, and I found them in different words, and I said at the end of the live program what I had said in the past episodes. I asked for opinions on happiness, and they talked about everything but happiness. They told me about feelings of human affliction for a certain time and then they went away, and the question remains, what is happiness? And where are they happy? After that I said to myself, I looked for happiness everywhere, and I entered all houses without permission. Through radio and television, I found no one to show me happiness. So happiness is not present in Morocco. That's what I thought at the time, otherwise Morocco is full of happy ones I knew later, and I'll talk about them later. I decided to look for happiness outside Morocco, and Europe was the closest mirage to Morocco. I traveled to Morocco in 1977 in search of happiness. My brotherhood increased there, because I did not change the environment, that is, from an evil environment to a good environment, but only a geographical location. That same year I returned to Morocco and to the field of radio, television and art, and I am unhappy with myself, but I was compelled to have no alternative, and I did not find the path of happiness. So the meaning of this is that promotion in these areas is promotion in brotherhood. But I had to keep searching until I found the desired happiness, and stay in the field of art, radio and television until I found the alternative. I continued my activities in this field. I prepared and presented programs, tuning, singing, writing and presenting art soirees on television, until 1981, when the misery increased and I felt the distress of leaving Morocco again in the search for happiness, but where? Towards the same mirage I went to earlier, Europe. Again, I went back to Morocco, and just for change, I attended an international radio in the northern Moroccan city of Tangier, called the Mediterranean International Radio, Medi 1, which became one of its stars, and at the same time I was singing and participating in parties and nights, so it increased fame, increased money and increased misery. So I started to wonder with myself, why do I live in this world? Can I eat, drink, sleep and work until I die? If a life like this and its end is death, it makes no sense and is unjustified. And if you are waiting for the death that will put an end to this brotherhood, why do I stay waiting for it? Why don't I rush it and die now? This and saws were from the devil to call for suicide, and this is what happens to so many celebrities, and I didn't know that the death of those who live in this situation is not an end to misfortune, but the beginning of genuine misfortune, and the painful agony in the fire of hell and of God. And I'm in conflict with the self and the devil. My mother was, her God's mercy is keen on my gift, but she did not find the deaf ear and the healthy heart that accepted the call of truth. Rather, what I saw from the actions of some Muslims, it was distancing me from religion, because their tongue gave a distorted image of Islam, as many Islam associates at this time and, unfortunately, I saw Muslims between excessive and excessive. In addition to some affiliates of science, they fell short in our invitation to God. I met with some of them on many occasions. They commended me in my radio and television work, and did not ask about my situation, whether I prayed or not. They were encouraging me to what I was. I was left with despair and hopelessness, and I began to think of the means that would comfort me from this bother, and put an end to this misfortune. In this case, I have a book in French entitled Suicide, for a French writer. I read it, and if it has tables of suicides in European countries, indicating that these suicide attacks are increasing year by year, and that the most suicidal country is Sweden, which provides its citizens with everything they need. Suicide bridge, to many who were throwing themselves from that bridge. When I read about the lives of these suicide bombers, I found that my life was similar to their own, with the difference between us, that I believed that there was a Lord in this existence, the Creator and the righteous of slavery, but I did not know that it was this slavery of God that would make me happy in this world, let alone lose sight of the afterlife and what awaited us. At the same time, I read about some celebrities from the West who had given up and their lives changed upside down, leaving what they were before their Islam, where they found their pleasure in uniting God Almighty and singling Him out with slavery. Among them is the famous British singer, Cat Stevens, whose name has become Yusuf Islam. I was amazed when I saw his picture in a magazine and his shape had changed completely, knowing that people looked at the apparent change, and they couldn't know the internal change and feelings that God explained His chest to Islam. When I last traveled to Europe, I was accompanied by a brother who was a year and 4 months older than me. He stayed in the Netherlands after returning to Morocco, and met there with preachers to God who were roaming the streets, cafes and public shops, looking for oblivious Muslims, to remind them of their religion and invite them to God Almighty. They were influenced by their words, their companion to the mosque where they were holding lessons and seminars. He stayed with them until his life changed, and I was informed that my brother had gone crazy and released his beard and had become a member of a dangerous organization, the same rumors that call anyone who adheres to God's religion it is God's year in the universe, that anyone who wants to enter the coterie of the faithful shall be harmed. 1. I think people should be left to stay safe and not be mesmerized. 2. Spider. 2. My brother returned after a while, but not from Morocco. And his religion was improved and created, and after a hard effort by my brother and the preachers to God whose hands my brother's gift was and my mother's effort and prayer, her God's mercy explained to God my breast and I resolved to quit what I was. I regretted the excess of God's side, and I resolved not to go back to that. So I found myself knowing a lot of information and cultures, except for the thing that I was created for, which would bring me the happiness of the world and the other, the religion of God Almighty, and I decided to leave everything to learn my religion. I came to ask for science and to invite God, and I found my desired happiness thanks to God and His gratitude, and I am now happy and thank God, since I took this path, and I asked God Almighty to prove Him until He was thrown. I missed Morocco for 1 and 3 months to learn religion and advocate for God on the councils of the Lord's scholars. I came out with a face, returned without the face I came out with, and after coming back I browsed the scraps of newspapers and magazines that were writing about me. I found the question I had been asked, and it was 12 years ago. Does it match the name? That is, are you happy in your artistic and private life? My answer was, I'm SP, Quest, and I'm still missing D and I'm looking for him, and when I find him, I'll tell you. It was 1974. I sent a letter to the journalist who had asked me the question. I asked me in a dialogue with the Backstage newspaper on the date of the question. I reminded him of the question, and my answer was the following. I reminded him of the answer, and then I told him, since I promised to tell you as soon as I found D, I found him and I am happy now. I found him in religion and invitation.